You're working on a 5th edition homebrew campaign with its own world, its own setting, its own everything. Tell us a little bit about it, what you're working on, and what you got.
From a 5th edition setting standpoint, I'm going to expound upon this in greater detail because that's the basis, but there's obviously a lot more to it because we have the point and click game and then we have the novel that's being written. But what can we do that is like that's different? That's you look at, say, Dragonlance. We all love Dragonlance.
Yeah.
Dragonlance had a very straightforward, like, Dungeons and Dragons story. Everybody meets in a tavern. There's a threat of dragons. There's the old gods are being searched for, and the adventurers meet up and they go forth and they start to have this adventure. And we said we definitely want to mirror that, but how can we have a unique threat that's going on that's not the same old, dark one coming back, old gods coming back? And so we said, well, what if we took coronavirus and put it into a fantasy world? And we went, oh snap, like that actually could work. There's the coronavirus that, our plague essentially going on.
Yeah.
And then we from there it started to flesh out and go, okay, well, how would people be reacting? And I think it was my brother who had the idea of like, well, we're thinking about coming up with the races, and we've got the elves and dwarves and all the traditional races. What if we had the humans being against the elves and the fae, and what if one of the elves or one of the fae races was the originator of the disease, and that's why there's this prejudice going on and everything else? We were looking at, say, you look at Dragonlance again, the Kinder, right? Kinder are like, they're not one of the typical that you would see in all the other worlds. Dwarves and elves show up everywhere in every setting ever.
Yeah.
But the Kinder were like the comedy relief of Dragonlance.
Sure.
Tassoff. So then we said, well, what if we had brownies? Because we had both just watched Willow recently, and we were like, dude, we should let's do brownies. And brownies, because in Willow, everybody looks at brownies as like the little rats, they're like, yeah, gross, And so we said, what if we had the brownies be like the carrier of the disease?
Oh.
That led us to go even further, and then we started to draft out these notes about, okay, why don't we take the structure of the humans, but instead of having it be all of humans, we have it be this organization who's the one putting all the blame on the brownies. So that's how we created the entity that would become the Church of the Elder Ways. We basically took the Catholic Church and said, what would it look like if the Catholic Church was the only religious entity and they had all the power? And then the world building started to happen from there, and we dropped back when I was creating the history of the humans. And, well, I guess we'll get to that in a minute because that's a little bit of a sidetrack. Anyway, so then we started going, well, what if it's not the brownies? What if it's this other thing? What if it's a magical disease and it's not actually a physical plague? You know what I mean? Like a physical plague being coronavirus is a physical plague. It's rooted in organic science. It affects human beings, but then we were like, what if it originated from magic? So that put everything upon pause for a minute, because then we said, well, now we have to come up with what is the magic system and why is this happening? So that created the moment for us to start delving into the backstory, and that's when I said, okay, let's have the humans are from the southern continent. And my brother and I were talking about, okay, so there was some sort of a big event, some sort of catastrophe. And the original brainstorming episodes we were just gonna have this whole southern continent be this plague zone that everyone they couldn't go to, and everyone had escaped it, but the plague had escaped quarantine, and so it was continuing to spread throughout the world. But then I changed that in the backstory and said, all right, let's do it this way. Southern continents, 500 years ago, human beings all had their own stuff down there. They were all about technology, quantum technology. They started messing around with different things, ended up discovering quantum tech, which allowed them to start manipulating matter, which is based on what we have right now, but it's taking it a step further and saying, okay, through quantum technology, they can tap into the quantum realm, and they can use that energy to do things like magicians, like elemental magic. So they can manipulate fire, ice, earth, the elements, so to speak, but it's done through the manipulation of atoms and through the manipulation of the quantum level of dimensions going on. So
Yeah, it's basically for humans.
this for humans, yeah.
It would be conceivable that if here on Earth, in our actual plane of existence that we live in, if we were to come up with the type of magic, it would use science, basically.
It would be based on science, right?
So okay, so the humans are using. That's pretty cool. Anyway, didn't mean to interrupt. Just want to make sure.
Oh no, it's all good. It's all
fully
good.
understood.
So that's going on down in the south. That's about 1,000 years ago. I mean, we can be arbitrary with dates because I actually haven't even finalized the dates on when that all started. We just know that about 500 years ago, humans got to a point where all of the various territories were infighting. They all launched a bunch of quantum missiles at each other, and it was like World War III, and it completely destroyed pretty much all of humanity. And that opened up all of these temporal rifts all across the planet because of the quantum dimensions being torn apart at the subatomic level. And the only people who survived was this small chapel, this small group of this group called the Church of the Elder Ways. They had a chapel way to the north, all the way up on the border of this place called the Tarna Mountains, which was bordering the land of the Fae, and no one had ever crossed the mountains before. So the rest of humanity dies out. A few of them survive. The ones who do survive make it up to the church, and they sort of use that as a shelter. Now, when all this happened, the quantum rifts exploded all around the world, and one of those explosions happened in the realm of the Fae. And I don't have the world map up behind me because we're in the middle of moving right now, but I'm sending that to you. You can get it up probably at this point or somewhere in the video. But in the middle of the map, there's this island, and there's a volcano on it, and around that is the inner sea. And then you can look at the continents, and everything's broken off on the side. So there was a huge rift that happened in the middle of the Fae realm, and that used to be where the Dwarven Kingdom was at. And when all of this went down, human beings are destroying each other. A huge rift forms. The elves try to close it. There's a massive explosion. It causes a huge continent-breaking event, cataclysm, which breaks off these edges of the continents, puts a huge crater in the middle. The sea comes up. The Dwarven kingdoms shift hundreds of kilometers to the southwest, and then everything kind of goes back to normal, right? Elves have closed the rifts, everything calms back down, and unbeknownst to them, in the southern realms, the humans are rebuilding at this chapel in the mountains, but this corruption from all the quantum bombs starts to creep north until the point where the humans realize they're going to have to completely abandon the realm. So this is where we kept the plague-ridden continent. It's still there,
Yeah.
but they had to escape. So they came over the mountains that have never been crossed before. They
By
enter
humans?
the realm.
By humans?
The humans,
Right,
yes.
right. Now,
So they,
before we go further in the story,
Mhm.
I would assume at this point, right? First of all, that's a very human thing to happen, and but I would assume that just based off the chaos they've created in this world, right, with the rifts and all the war and the quantum rifts opening and all that kind of thing, and the trouble that they've caused the planet and affected the other races, I would assume at this point in history, with the war going on and the aftermath, that probably the other races probably already have a lot of tension against the humans from the get-go,
elves
right?
do. The dwarves don't really know what went down. Neither do. Yeah, it's basically only the elves that at least became aware of humans at that point. In the terms of becoming aware, meaning that they became aware that humans had suddenly reached this point of technological prowess, that they were meddling with powers that they didn't understand.
Okay.
So the elves were aware of humans at this point and sort of keeping an eye on them now. And when they cross the mountains, this is when we get to the elves have basically a civil war that happens at this point in time, because the elves cross the mountains, they come into the Fey realm for the first time, and it's remnants. We're talking a few thousand people, that's it.
Okay.
But they brought with them the relics of the quantum technology from before. So they've got the things that the church was previously using to heal the sick and keep the poison in the land at bay. These are these quantum relics from before that allow them to manipulate energy, and they've been using it for good, so to speak, to cure their people and survive and everything else. But the elves look at this and go, hang on, we know what you did these few hundred years ago when you wiped out your own civilization. We're going to keep an eye on you. Now, this causes a rift within the elves because we have one group of elves who looks at humans and say, they're kids playing with fire,
Right.
but they can probably learn if we give them time to learn. They screwed up once, they got burnt. Maybe that was enough. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Then there's another group of the elves that says, hell no. Like, these people need to be eradicated. We cannot have them in the realm of the Fae. And so there's a civil war within the elven kingdoms at this point in time. And eventually this comes to a head where the losing side is the side that wants to kick humans out. That wants to eradicate them. They want to have a genocide. They just want to kill humans completely off the face of the planet because they said, look what they already did. Now they're in our realm. This can't happen. They lose. They get exiled up into the far northwest into the ice realm, and they disappear from known history for the moment. But this is important because they do play a part in the story later on.
So this opens up a couple role play opportunities for people playing this campaign. I can see, because if you play an elf, for example, and you're with a party, that might have a human or two or three in it, you would have that choice, right? You could role play you're an elf who hates the humans, but for whatever reason, based on the background, whatever's going on, that you're joining them out of necessity. Or you could play the elf who actually is, feels like the humans deserve another chance, etc., and is trying to help this group of adventurers for whatever reason. Of course, all that stuff's backstory for you and your party that's running the campaign. But I see that you could play it either way and make some really interesting role play scenarios there.
It goes even deeper too, because once we get into the politics that I'm going to be getting into here in a minute, there's another level of stuff that starts coming into play with how it's going to affect the role play relationships between the characters.
Your campaign, which is available through Patreon, right? And you explain that real quick before we move forward on other supplementary.
Yeah, so this video is coming out before we've actually launched the books. So what we have right now, you can pre-order it on Patreon. We have the source book, which contains all of the information you would ever need to run a campaign in our world.
Okay.
It's the races, it's the history that I've just explained over the last however many minutes we've been on the air here. It's all the factions. It's how the Circle of Mages works, because we haven't talked classes yet, but I'm sure we'll dive into that later in this video. But we talk about all the classes, all the factions, the history of the world. That's all in the source book. Then there's the first campaign module, which is called Escape from Parthana.
Yeah, and I'm gonna sweeten the pot a little bit. All right, I'm gonna sweeten the pot. To the first 4 people, and there's a couple things I need you to do to verify. Listen carefully. For the first 4 people that become Patreon members, I will run the campaign with you live on my channel, if you want to do it. If you're interested in doing that, go to the link, become a Patreon on the Weave and Void. I guess I should say the Wandering Hermits, because that's the company.
The Patreon, yeah.
So go to Wandering Hermits, become a Patreon. Now you have to do it at Dungeoneer, is that right? Is that the right term for it?
It's the Dungeon Master tier.
Dungeon Master tier, which is $15 a month.
It's $15 a month.
Yeah, so that or higher. Go ahead and do that. Then leave me a comment. Tell me that you did it, and that way I can know who did it first and make sure it's fair. And then all I'm going to do is verify with Renfail that you are a tier membership. And then as long as you stay tiered for 4 months, then those top 4 people, so that means even if you see 4 comments already down there, that doesn't mean those people may not make it to the finale for when the book's released. So you may, just because you're not the top 4 doesn't mean you won't make it, right? So then after 4 months, you're still a Patreon there. I will start setting up and getting it prepared to run that campaign. As I'll be the Dungeon Master, and we'll run the campaign with those 4 people. So,
and it is. I gotta tell you, because we did the playtest, and we did the playtest in a very condensed format in 6 sessions. Was what we did. So when you go through the module, it's broken up into 6 sections, but it's way more in depth than that, because when we did those sessions, I didn't have all the side quests in or all this other stuff now. So now we've got everything fleshed out. It's a good. I think it's maybe not as long as the Lost Mine of Phandelver, but I think that for for a level 1 to 4 adventure, you'll get 2, possibly 3 months out of it. Well, I guess it depends on how often you're playing. But if you're
And,
playing like once a week,
and it depends too on like how that party plays,
sessions,
right? Like, do
yes.
they role play a lot?